I just came back from Baku from the COP29, the 29th climate conference, which is the conference of parties to the convention, UNFCCC convention. And it's one of the most disappointing COPs that I have ever attended in the last 17 years. 16 COPs I have been attending from COP 15. So there are basically three points that I would like to mention. The first, of course, everybody was talking about this COP being a finance COP, and finance COP meaning the long demanded, long pending, the new collective quantified goal of climate finance, because everybody knows that in first in Copenhagen, then actually in Cancun in 2010, COP 16, this artificial goal of $100 billion per year from 2020 was brought out of nowhere, and that was presented to all countries as a goal. For a long time, developing countries have been demanding that this major goal of 100 billion, which to be honest has never been fulfilled completely with public finance and grant-based finance, because even this 100 billion that the developed countries had thrown at the developing countries and are saying that we are trying to fulfill, and they said in 2022 they fulfilled it. That has actually never been grant-based completely. It is part grant, part loan, part market-based loan, part blended finance, so private finance, small part public finance. So all kind of complexities, all kinds of manipulations. And there are analyses that showed that these actually, if you take public finance and if you take much lower than market rate finances, it never exceeded $30-40 billion a year. So that's a very pitiable figure, and which is no comparison to what is needed. Because if you look at just one massive flooding event in Pakistan, just one country, it cost more than $15 billion. This year, the lot of expectation was there that this new collective quantified goal, NCQG, will be a substantial increase on that, and as per demand, a large part of that will come from public finances of developed countries. In between, around 15th of November, there was a draft issued by UNFCCC, which was a draft of NCQG, which mentioned about $455 to $585 billion, somewhere in the range, as the new collective quantified goal for climate finance. It was, again, in the draft itself, it was mentioned that this will be a combination of public finance, private finance, blended finance. This will be a combination of grants, loans, and many other kind of thing. And so this was never going to be accepted by the developing countries, and they were contesting it. A lot of countries prepared their drafts, their text for opposing this. Ultimately, what came out on the night of early morning or late night of November 23, or early morning of November 24, you can say, is the pathetic figure of $300 billion per year to be given, and that too from 2035. So the question was that from 2025, there has to be a new collective quantified goal, which will replace the 100 billion. Now, and the developing countries throughout this time have been demanding that it should be, and there were basis for that, because the UNFCCC itself did studies and which showed at least $1 trillion per annum is the minimum requirement. The energy question, the energy transition itself requires, there is a gap of $4.5 trillion in the transition finance. So all this to be kept aside, but minimum workable finance that was worked out by UNFCCC a few years ago was around 1 trillion. And the developing countries, based on that and based on different other assessments, they were demanding that $1.3 trillion per year should be given, out of which $600 billion should be grants, not loans. So the finance goal that has come out finally, and people are saying it was forcefully gravelled through on the last night. It is partly true. The Azerbaijan presidency, Mr. Babayev, who was the COP president, he presented the draft and he disallowed any discussion on that night. But there are enough precedences in the COP procedure that if some developing countries, any country, if they strongly oppose a decision being thrust upon, that decision cannot be taken. We can recall 2009, 10, 11, 12, that period when Bolivia stood very strong and firm, and Bolivia thought it actually prevented several wrong, bad decisions from being taken. You can recall in Glasgow, India and China, when the developed countries pushed this text with the coal phase out, not mentioning oil and gas, because their economies have largely come out of coal and are more dependent on oil and gas. So they put this proposal of coal phase out, which overall is welcome, but coal phase out is not going to do the work because oil is a bigger contributor to climate change now, greenhouse gas production. So India and China very strongly objected to this, and that draft was not accepted. So there are enough evidences that if the developing country negotiators had been strongly opposing and rejecting this draft, this would not have been accepted. So this developing country and India now accusing the COP29 presidency, it has some truth that COP29 presidency aided by the developed country blocs have pushed through, but India actually very meekly surrendered. India and many other developing countries surrendered. They didn't say no clearly, which would have by UN consensus mechanism, which have rejected the draft. So this is a very pathetic draft for a NCQG, New Collective Quantified Goal for Climate Finance, which is, I'm saying again, $300 billion per year, and which is from all kinds of sources, public, private, blended, and which will not be, there is nothing mentioned what will be grant, what will be loans, soft loans, much below market rate, what will be market rate loans, or what kind of thing. Nothing has been clarified. So it's an extremely fuzzy document, and anything is possible under that. Any kind of manipulation is possible. The other big disappointment is complete operationalization of the Article 6 of Paris Agreement. And Article 6, if you recall, Article 6 defines the carbon markets. The old carbon markets of CDM and this emission trading scheme, the ETS and CDM schemes. ETS was between European countries and CDM is global, mostly flew from developed countries to developing countries. If you recall those, there are a lot of manipulations. Actually, most CDM projects cause a lot more actually distress to marginalized, vulnerable, and impacted communities. So the Paris Agreement adopted the Article 6, 6.2 and 6.4 are for carbon markets, which are voluntary and the compliance. And these from Paris Agreement onward in 2015, the rules could not be finalized and it could not have been operationalized because there are a lot of complications in that. How you do it, how you verify it, because in between, lot of scams about the carbon market also came into light, came into the open. The largest verifier, Vera, it was found out that most of the forest carbon projects they have certified and verified are actually scams. No carbon sequestration has happened there. So it was actually a huge global scam. But this year, the second biggest disappointment is the COP process also operationalized the entire carbon market package through Paris Agreement Article 6. So now, any kind of fraudulent carbon market mechanisms, whether it is carbon removal proposal, whether it is notional carbon reduction proposal, whether it is some kind of afforestation, some kind of forest related thing, or some kind of avoided emission, all of these scams and all of these very fuzzy things will now be used to show that developed countries or those who are paying for those carbon market mechanism through the carbon market mechanism, they will be getting these credits as they have reduced. They will not be reducing their emissions. There's fraudulent activities will take place in many places. And apart from that, this kind of afforestation and deforestation checks, these are also subject to massive forest fire, which are increasing due to climate change, increasing temperature and dryness. So this very, very fuzzy mechanisms of carbon markets, which are subject to a lot of uncertainties, which has not been shown to really sequester carbon over a long term in any assured manner. This has now been given official sanction of the UNFCCC. So from next year, carbon markets are going to be a very big player. And already, as we see in India, carbon markets have entered not only forest in Meghalaya, in Mizoram, in Uttarakhand, in UP, Faizabad district, but also in the agricultural fields of Karnataka, Andhra, and again UP, Uttarakhand. There are farmers are being herded together. They are being told to change their farming practices so that more soil carbon can be sequestered, and that can be measured by drones and satellites, and that amount can be certified, and then a little bit of money, some pittance, can be given to the farmers. So all the records of farmers lands and their land qualities, its nutrient carbon content, all of these will be becoming property of some international bodies, which can be used later for any kind of control of the entire farming and agricultural sector. So this is again a big threat, and the carbon market becoming operational officially through the UN sanction now makes it legal. Till now, voluntary markets were operationalized, because voluntary markets, anybody can work at any point of time. But now the same uncertainties, the same scam prone areas will become the major, one of the major means of so-called reduction of emissions. So overall, this COP is a complete disappointment. This COP is a disaster, and it's hardly likely that COP30 in Brazil will be able to recover some of these, because once the UNFCCC decision on this carbon markets is final, that probably will not be taken back, because even Brazil did not resist this, being the next host, next COP president, didn't resist these moves of either the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal of climate finance, or the new carbon market rules. What I guessed as a last comment is many developing countries, including India, though India, like, this is an important point, that many of the countries have earlier received substantial funding, whether it is through CDM, whether it is through other climate finance for other projects. Substantial amount of funding has flown to India through the CDM projects. But the funding has flown mostly to corporates, which are actually damaging the environment, which are creating a lot of emissions, and which are damaging poor people's, marginalized people's lives and livelihoods. And the double whammy, that on the one hand, in the global negotiations, there is a pathetic outcome, both in terms of the new climate finance goal as well as the carbon markets. And in at home, in the same developing countries which are claiming that they are champions of this climate cause and they are doing a lot, they are actually going in the same route that the rich countries have gone, and they are destroying their environment. They are building up on high emission infrastructure. They are cutting down on low emission infrastructure, and they are actually hitting at people at the bottom who are already being impacted by physical impacts of the climate. So, along with the devastating COP, I think we also need to focus our attention on what happens at home in India and South Asia, because this region is one of the most climate vulnerable. And in the coming days, we will be trying to build up people's collectives and people responses in many on of this.